Donald Trump defending Michael Flynn. You heard me right, even though he just fired the National Security Advisor just a couple days earlier. Former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell. He joins to discuss that and a whole lot more. Then the president says Flynn was fired because of trust issues, not legal ones. So the question is begged then, why are people lining up to investigate what really happened? Our legal panel will join us to debate. Also, how prosecutors can seize cash, cars, furniture, even if you haven't been convicted of any crimes. It's called asset forfeiture, and it could happen just about anywhere. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Well, it's supposed to be an administration focused on jobs, borders, making America great again. But today, the 26th day of the Trump administration, let that sink in. The White House was once again focused on damage control. That, as the president welcomed the Israeli prime minister to the White House, U.S.-Israeli relations, they were just a blip, frankly, on the radar today. So was Andy Puzder, withdrawing his name as Labor Secretary nominee. Instead, the focus still on the firing of the National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. That, as a new report, has Americans once again wondering about the relationship between Trump and, yes, Russia. Senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman has more and frankly worked right up to the show deadline because that's how much facts are changing on this. But it does seem to be pushing in one direction. The bizarre connection between Trump and Russia that we've wondered at for more than 12 months now, it seems to be reaching a crescendo where a whole lot of folks have a whole lot of questions.
And in a different administration, Rich, both of these stories would have people scratching their heads, but it's almost par for the course in Donald Trump's administration. The president today heaped praise on Michael Flynn, the National Security Advisor he fired on Monday. This as Trump made it increasingly clear that Flynn was fired not because of what he did, but because what he did got so much attention. Also getting attention, that report in the Times that claims the Trump campaign was in continual contact with Russian intelligence throughout the 2016 campaign. President Trump on the defensive at the White House. The New York Times reporting that people inside and outside his campaign had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence officials in the year before the election.
People are trying to cover up for a terrible loss that the Democrats had under Hillary Clinton.
The Times report did not say that the Trump associates knew they were talking to Russian intelligence officers, and the paper reported U.S. officials haven't seen any evidence that the Trump team cooperated with Russia in the hack of the Democrats or had anything to do with it. The White House has denied any contact with Russian officials during the campaign. On ex-National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who discussed sanctions with the Russian ambassador in December, the White House said Flynn resigned because of an erosion of trust. But one day later, the president was defending Flynn.
I think it's very, very unfair what's happened to General Flynn, the way he was treated, and the documents and papers that were illegally, I stress that, illegally leaked.
Lawmakers on both sides now calling for a bipartisan congressional investigation.
An independent outside commission, nonpartisan commission outside with subpoena power to find the truth.
If there's contacts between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence officials outside the norm, that's not only big league bad, that's a game changer.
Again, game changer, that from a Republican senator. Joining us now to help us unpack all of this, I can't think of a better person, former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, Democrat from Maine. He was also instrumental in negotiating a peace agreement between Northern Ireland, I should say, and he also was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I don't even know where to start, but I'm going to refer to some of the folks that you know well on the Hill and what they're saying, and tell me if you agree with their sentiments. I'll start first with Leon Panetta, a former chief of staff himself and a former defense secretary and CIA director. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "I've never been so nervous in my lifetime about what may or may not happen in Washington. I don't know whether this White House is capable of responding in a thoughtful or careful way should a crisis erupt. You can do hit and run stuff over a period of time, but at some point, I don't give a damn what your particular sense of change is all about. You cannot afford to have change become chaos." Is chaos a right word to describe where we are right now? And do you share his fear as to where we are positioned at the moment?
Well, everyone has their own term to describe what I think most people agree is an unusual start to a new administration. I've been involved in several of them, and I think it's pretty clear that this has been a difficult start for the incoming administration. My hope is that on domestic affairs, that there'll be areas of agreement between Democrats and Republicans. I think what Mr. Panetta's concerns are, and they are widely shared by many Americans, including me, is the risk of some unexpected event in foreign affairs that has tended to dominate the news. Although, interestingly, the president has now rather consistently moved away from the controversial views he expressed in the campaign. And so I think that there may be some prospect of settling down there as well.
But in terms of chain of command, especially as it relates to national security and the NSC, John McCain, who I know you know well, said, speaking of the Trump White House, quote, nobody knows who's in charge and nobody knows who's setting policy when it comes to the national security apparatus. It was echoed, in fact, by General Thomas, who's head of special ops. He said, our government continues to be in unbelievable turmoil. I hope they sort it out because we are a nation at war. Reportedly, people said they're afraid to pick up the phone call because they don't know who's going to be on the other end. You can't run I would imagine, a national security apparatus that way, Senator.
That is the most disturbing element, the absence of any clear lines of authority internally below the president, and the absence of a process that comes upward to the president that would provide him with clear descriptions of current problems and recommendations for solution that hopefully will be adopted in the national interest. I think along those lines, although the president's press conference today was devoted to the Middle East, I did not see the entire press conference because I was in a car going across town at the time. But in the aftermath, in the discussion of it, it was reported that he praised Mr. Flynn, his now departed National Security Advisor, and blamed his departure on the media. That's a very disturbing statement because it was the president himself who dismissed Mr. Flynn, and according to the White House, the president's own spokesman, it was because Mr. Flynn had misled the vice president and others regarding telephone calls that he had with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. Previously.
In fact, his words, Senator, were that Mr. Flynn was treated unfairly by the quote-unquote fake news media, even though the White House made great pains yesterday to say that it was the president, in fact, who demanded the resignation for Mr. Flynn himself. But besides that, you've seen the wide reporting today from multiple sources that top aides within the Trump campaign were in frequent contact with senior Russian officials during the campaign. We've heard all of, and I'm sure you've seen it yourself, all the reporting on this. Senior intelligence officials were alarmed by the continued support or the absence of any indictment of the behavior of Putin repeatedly throughout. It raised alarms. They were obviously monitoring the situation, and they came across these various correspondences. My gosh, we're not even a month into the administration. How troubling is it that the president, and we still don't know the scope of this, could have had, or at least his team could have had, these lengthy kind of connections with the Russian government?
Well, I think the one thing that's clear from all of this is that there has to be a really thorough and bipartisan investigation into just what happened. This is a very serious matter. Obviously, there are conflicting accounts. Some information has been leaked, which is unfortunate and wrong, but that's a part of the reality of the process in the media-conscious age in which we live. I will say to you that just yesterday I was in Brussels and I spoke at a conference where dozens of countries from Europe, the Middle East, and Africa were represented. And there's widespread apprehension there about the possibility that the United States will align itself with President Putin and Russia to the detriment of the countries of Eastern and Central Europe and our traditional allies in NATO. I hope very much that at the earliest opportunity there will be a NATO summit meeting, and I hope that President Trump will go there and provide to our historic allies a firm and strong statement of commitment to NATO, to the European Union, to the institutions that the United States led the way in creating after the Second World War in an effort to encourage peace and stability and progress and prosperity and democracy throughout Europe and in the world. I think that's of critical importance that we make clear that while we want good relations with Russia, that would be good for us and for them, we can't do it on the terms that President Putin and Russia violated international law in the Crimea and in Ukraine, for which the United States led the effort to impose sanctions on them. Those sanctions are the subject of much of this discussion that's going on in this country regarding Mr. Flynn and others. So we have to do two things. We have to get at the bottom of that through a truly independent, impartial investigation in our own country. And secondly, we have to reassure our traditional allies that the United States is committed to the Western Alliance, which we helped create, and the United States keeps its treaty obligations to our NATO partners.
Which, by the way, was even further complicated by General Mattis's remarks. For those nations who weren't making full payments, they can in effect expect to get less than full protections. But coming back to Russia for a minute and the type of investigation that would be truly transparent. You have concurrent investigations, one going on by the FBI independent of this. You've been there in the Senate for 6 straight years. You were considered the most trustworthy member, bipartisan, from both aisles. They selected you to be the person that could be considered most trusted. What kind of, when we say bipartisan, does that mean Republicans, Democrats could each choose 8 members that they do it? They go to a former member, they go to an independent prosecutor. What do we need to get to the bottom of this to give the country confidence that there isn't blackmail going on from Moscow over here, that this particular campaign for the Trump campaign wasn't working in concert with the Russians when they were hacking into the DNC, et cetera? What do you think should happen that will give Washington comfort, but more importantly, the American public?
Well, any of the mechanisms you described would do that. There's no just one way to do this or anything else. I think it is important, first, that it be genuinely independent, that it not just be the administration investigating itself. Secondly, that it be bipartisan. You could do that with a select congressional committee, or the third possibility is, of course, for an independent counsel to consider, to conduct an investigation of it. I don't think you have to say there's only one way to do this. There isn't. What has to be clear is that it is genuinely independent, that it is genuinely thorough, and that it will look into this and follow the evidence wherever it leads and make recommendations based on that evidence.
Well, we can guarantee one thing, it will not be dull. Senator Mitchell, I certainly appreciate the time here and the insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up next, everyone, I'm going to bring in our panel of attorneys, and they're going to take a look at all the legal issues surrounding Michael Flynn's contact with the Russians. You heard what the senator had to say here, a bipartisan commission, maybe even we go to independent prosecutor. Who should conduct this investigation? Who should get subpoenaed? What laws potentially could have been broken? All that and much more straight ahead.